Hey beautiful friends, you are about to watch a masterclass that I recorded for my membership only area about the ego. I thought this content was so important that I decided to put on my YouTube and make it free, available to everyone. This class is so important because it tells us what the ego is, what the patterns of the ego are, why the ego is the small and limiting self, why it's so important to get to know and befriend your ego. And the following classes will be about how do we purify, how to heal the ego so we can live unlimited. We can live in a state of joy, love, freedom. If you like this video and you're interested in watching other master classes, they're all going to be released in my membership area in about a month. If you want to be notified when this membership area is available, it's going to be affordable for everyone. Make sure, first of all, you subscribe to this channel and also click the link to my website and subscribe to my newsletter so you'll be the first one to get a notification when the membership area is open. And it's going to be a great price, a great deal for the first 20 people who enter my membership area. I wanted this work to be affordable to everyone, so I'm putting all my best content, what clients wanted to know the most, what clients benefit the most. I'm putting all in this membership area. So make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and also go to my website, enter your email so you can receive my newsletter when the membership area is ready. Enjoy this video and share. Thank you. Hello, beautiful friends. If you are new to this portal, this membership area, welcome. Today, the master class, it's about the ego. How do we move from the ego to our essence? In other words, how do we move from this mental construct, this thinking process that is based on our past, is limited. It has a sense of separation, operates in division and separation, in polarization, in duality. How do we go from that space that is our conditioning to our essence, which is our truth, who we are in our truth? So when we say, I want to live my potential, know who I am, we are asking how to see what is behind the ego, behind the veils of illusion. So before I get started, let me share with you what I'm going to cover in this video that will most likely be 2 or 3 parts. In this part, I want to help you to understand what this mental process called the ego really is. The ego is a concept that a lot of people avoid looking at because there's this misperception that only people that are narcissists or live with a lot of superiority attitude have an ego. We all have an ego. As long as we are a human being living in this construct, we have an ego because we have this thinking, this limited thinking process. It's a survival mechanism in a way. So what I want to demystify here as well is that we are not here. As we do this work of transformation, healing, transcendence, even you can call enlightenment, that has nothing to do with killing or destroying our ego. What we're looking for is to understand, know our ego, have the awareness when we are operating from the ego, which is not a place of freedom, is not even a place of free will because the ego is a conditioning of the past. So we need to recognize when we're operating in the ego. So we're going to transform, we heal, we purify, see the ego as almost like a patient that needs to be healed. It's a part of us that we need to embrace because the truth is anything that we avoid becomes our shadow, which you can think as a suppressed ego. The ego is what we know and the shadow is what we don't know and we can project. Another video for another time that we will talk about the shadow. So first I'm going to start here with a quote from A Course in Miracles and we're going to go from there. The quote says, Love is your power, which the ego must deny. Love is your power, which the ego must deny. So if we talk again about ego to essence, the essence is love. And you can operate on both at the same time. If you really operate in true love, which is capital L love, not that romantic love as an emotion, but love as a state of consciousness, as a state of unity. When you are in that state, you are not in the ego. Let's say that state is our essence, is the essence of the heart, is the essence of the higher self, another word. And the ego, for just terminology, simplicity, is our small self or limited mind. Some teachers might call it the lower self. So you can see that the ego fights to deny the love, because when you are in that place of unity, the ego in that moment is not present. In this thinking process that almost feels like an entity in us, almost like this character in us, it is a character, is fighting for its survival. So in this video today, I want to be very clear and share with you what the ego is, what the patterns and behaviors of the ego are, how it's showing up in your life, so you can start pointing and seeing the ego. And you don't want to deny, you don't want to judge, you don't want to criticize, because healing happens when we embrace every single part of us. And the ego is the part of us that we need to embrace. Another quote that I want to read to you from A Course in Miracles is this: no one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them. For not looking is the way they are protected. So I'm going to read one more time. No one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them. For not looking is the way they are protected. So this is a great segue to speak about the definitions of the ego. We can say the ego is our conditioning of the past. It's a collection of all our beliefs, perceptions, meanings, associations we make that we learn in our past. We learn by modeling, watching our caretakers or parents. We also learn by conditioning based on what they taught us first when what teachings were we exposed to at first. And we also inherit the beliefs, the meanings, associations from our ancestors. Through epigenetics, those behaviors are passed into us. They become part of our program. And the beauty is we can change all that program. So we can call the ego a record of the past. Also, the ego is our separated self. Every time we stand in one place and we say us but not them, or them but not us, that's the ego. The ego operates in duality. It's always going to separate, create something to be apart, to exclude. That's why we need to watch, because otherwise we live in separation. Separation within ourselves, meaning we're separated from our hearts, separated from our higher self, and with that we'll be separated from others. So this is another reason this class is very important, so you stop living in a state of separation, because healing happens in a state of unity with your heart, and then unity with others. Another definition for the ego is this aspect of us that distorts reality. Because of our perception, as I said, the ego is a collection of our perception, beliefs, associations, meanings of the past. We are looking at everyone and everything from the lenses of that perception. That means, also because the way our brain operates, we need to select. We get billions of information coming at us per second. So the brain needs to select. The brain needs to distort, delete, and generalize. So seeing the things from the lenses of distortion, that means we're not really seeing the truth, because the ego is limited. We're seeing partial truth, and a lot of times we're not seeing the truth at all, especially if we are taking into our past trauma or past emotional imprints. We are seeing everything from those lenses. The ego distorts everything. So again, moving from the ego to essence, in a way, is moving from your illusion, from your limited self, to truth, capital T, truth. And there's only one way to learn the truth, which is by understanding the ego. That's why that quote from Course in Miracles says, you need to look at your illusions. That is the process of awakening. We see this phrase being thrown out there so much. We are in the process of awakening. It's in my website, it's in my Instagram. The great awakening is happening now. What is this process of awakening? It's nothing that esoteric or metaphysical. It's simply the process of waking up from the ego, waking up from these illusions that keep us asleep, in a way, keep us at trance, in a state of trance, and we start seeing the truth. An example, the truth might be, I am not a limited being, or I am enough. I am enough. I believe my whole life I wasn't enough because of what my mother did or my father did, whatever the story might be for you. You are enough, you are worthy, and you are unlimited when you tap into this higher intelligence of God consciousness or source. We're not going to even go there. You can simply use the term higher self. Your higher self is not limited to your body. Another way to describe the ego is by saying, is the limited body. The body who craves, the body that attaches, the body who fears. That's our ego. So our ego gets expressed through our bodies. So we need to learn about the ego, because we also need to honor the needs of the body. So I hope by the end of these classes, you have a good knowledge of how to transform, heal, purify the ego, so you live in pure alignment between mind, body, and soul. Summarizing, the ego is our limited self. The ego separates everything. The ego has also a sense of superiority. The ego has to find a place where it feels the strongest to say, I am better than you. In I would say less common times, the egos also can bring a tremendous sense of inferiority. When you say things like, all those people are great, but I'm not, which is really sometimes the voice of depression. Everybody's having fun, everyone is winning in life except me. It's a state of victimhood. Living in victim consciousness is also a state of the ego, and usually in that state you experience a lot of anger, a lot of resentment. You say things like, life is not fair, why them and not me, or why me, not them, things like that. So through this video, I'm going to be sharing some of the language that are very common for the ego. That voice in our head that we say, oh my God, this voice in our heads, 90%, or if not 99%, is the voice of the ego, until you start purifying the ego, and then that voice starts becoming more the voice of your heart. Usually the voice of the ego is not gentle, it's judgmental, it's a critic, it's a judge. So judging ourselves and judging others is definitely a voice of the ego. So anything that has this polarization of negativity, is heavy, is dense, you can count that is the ego. So let me describe a little more of the aspects of this thinking process, because the ego is simply a thinking process, if you want to summarize everything. The fear operates in survival. In that aspect of the ego, let's just call this part of you, this process in you, sees everything from the lenses of fear, is always in survival. It's always looking for, like, when is the shoe gonna drop next? It's never content, it's never satisfied, because the ego doesn't feel safe. Something that always lives in survival cannot at the same time feel safe. And so much of this work that I do for my own inner work, the work I help my clients with, it's helping people to feel safe, because we lost the sense of safety most likely in our childhood, when we got betrayed, we got disappointed, our caretakers were not there, or there's abuse, there is neglect. So most of us lost trust long time ago, and then we developed these personalities, which is another definition for the ego, our personalities. So we develop personalities, we develop identities. So if you just want to define the ego with two words, I will use separation and identification. That's it. Every part of us that separates, excludes, is the ego. Every part of us that is identified, I'm a coach, I'm an athlete, I'm a runner, I'm a doctor, I'm the type of person who speaks the truth. The moment you become identified with those traits, with the descriptions of who you are, that's the ego. A big part of awakening, a big part of purifying our hearts so we can live in a state of love is actually knowing these personalities and disidentify from them. In the spiritual work, we call this, or in the world of psychedelic medicine journeys, we call this the death of the ego. Let me clarify, it's not really the death of the ego, it is the death of a construct, is the death of our identification with the title, the coach, the teacher, the healer, the yogi, whatever that is for you. You don't become fully identified with that, because when you fully identify with that, you live in your ego. And most people are. So if you are hearing these words and saying, oh my God, I live in my ego, welcome to the club. I live in my ego most of my life, and I still get on my knees, weekly, at least once a week, and say, oh my God, I was so in my ego. This work is to bring this vocabulary, is to raise your awareness, is to build this knowledge in you, so when you open your ego, you can catch, you will know. You start identifying more with the higher self in you, with your spirit, where you can witness and bring curiosity and compassion to purify the ego. So separation and identification are the two only things that you need to remember when it comes to defining the ego. So since the ego lives in survival, it's always going to look at everything from the lenses of fear. There's a big movement right now, and I'm definitely part of this movement, that says it is the end of fear as we know it. I'm not talking about this primal fear that is our biology, is our amygdala in our brain, the fear that tells us, hey, there's a fire in the building, run. That fear is never going to be touched. I'm not talking about that primal fear that will save our lives if necessary. I'm talking about the mental fear, the constructs of fear, the worries and ruminations and fear what's going to happen in the future, and what ifs, anxiety. This is all a construct of the ego. It's all survival based. It's not real. So I'm talking about the irrational fears that we create by our thoughts alone. If we pause this video right now and I ask you, bring your biggest fear and think about this fear for about 90 seconds, you will feel in your body a response to that fear. So we can create the hormones of fear, the hormones of stress in the body just by the thought of fear alone. Just something to remember. Since the ego is our thought system, part of this transformation path is to pay attention to our thoughts. Because our thoughts, until we start awakening, they're going to be part of the conditioning that I spoke about. It's going to be automatic. I have clients that experience a lot of pain. They come to me and say, Alex, how can I stop this voice in my head? This voice is mean. This voice drives me crazy. And this is one of the reasons a lot of people get addicted to maybe drugs, alcohol, sex, video game, cigarettes, whatever the addiction is, because this voice can become so negative and so loud that it becomes the cause of a lot of addiction, because that voice can cause a lot of pain. This is another reason to fully understand this voice in our head that is mostly the ego speaking. In your ego, in our ego, we also don't have free will. If we are in the conditioning, meaning an automatic program, we're not even thinking about it. The thoughts are happening behind the scenes. You acting and you're not even present. You are not in your free will. There's a lot of discussions these days, especially because of determinism, that says we really don't have free will. And I agree with that if based on the assumption that most people are living in their egos, they're not aware, they're not present, they're not awake, there's absolutely no free will because everything has come from that conditioning. Everything is determined in a way. When we start awakening and become present, that's when we have access to the free will, where we in the power of choice. Because in the ego, we are not choosing. That conditioning, the fear, the anger, the resentment, whatever that program is choosing for you, is choosing for me. When you are present in a moment and awake, connected with your body, you have the power of choice. That's when you truly can say yes or no, and that's coming from your free will. So it's a very empowering place when you start living more in your essence, and the present moment is the portal to presence. When you're there, you can deploy your free will and make choices that align with your vision, with the person that you want to be. And who do you want to be? That involves this process of disidentifying from the ego. Because a lot of times we don't like who we are, we don't like certain behaviors, we don't like the way we show up because the ego is ruling us. In other words, the ego is playing the master and it makes a terrible mess. It's like saying my intellect, my head is going to be the master. And it has served a lot of people, has served myself, I'm sure has served you, and no longer serves because the master needs to be the heart. If we want to start living more in a state of peace with ourselves, which is the only way we're going to create peace in this world, is to start with ourselves, in our communities, in our groups, in our families. Assuming that you want to live in a state of love, high consciousness, that's why you attract to this channel here, this area. Assuming that you want to live in that state, you need to have practices. We're going to talk about that in the second part video. You need to have practices that teach you, that strengthen your connection with your heart, that strengthen your confidence of listening to your heart. You start knowing the difference between who's speaking, is the heart or is the head. And you don't want it then to be in conflict anymore, because a lot of our stress, a lot of our conflicts can be between the head and the heart. When you start listening to your heart, you start living in truth and you start living in your essence. Even when you have to make hard decisions, you feel like you're living in alignment. And a life lived in alignment is a peaceful life. Even though sometimes might not feel peaceful, but you're in peace because you might say something like, I made this decision, it was hard, and it feels right. When something just feels right, you are living your truth. So I spoke also about the distortion. How do we practice distorted interpretations? We see something and it's a distorted view. Anytime we take a strong position with anything, and it sounds like this: she did that, I'm right, she did that, I didn't do anything, she created that whole drama, it is her fault, I'm angry at her, and this is my position. That's a distorted interpretation, because the fact is, in this situation, when it might be a conflict with somebody, a loving one, a friend, a kid, your partner, again, separation, right? She did, but not me. That separation, you already know it's coming from the ego, and it's distorted. Because in any relationship, there's always two people participating. Even if you're not participating in your words, you're participating energetically. I can't tell how many times I said all the right words to somebody, but energetically I was in my ego. I had an agenda. That's another aspect of the ego. The ego has an agenda. The ego manipulates to get the outcome, to feel safe. The ego wants to feel safe, but never does, because it's always living in survival. So it can have a temporary sense of safety, but it's not going to be satisfied because our egos are never satisfied. It's like, again, a patient that needs to be healed. It's sick because it's never satisfied. The ego is also the doer in us. Now, this one might sound a little challenging for you. Let me explain. We all have this doer. Let's call this doer in us the action taker, the one that makes everything happen, the one that learned that I'm an achiever, I get things done. This is how I become successful. So there's this doer in us. And the doer has served us for many, many, many years, most of our lives, until we all reach a point that our doing becomes exhausting, that our doing no longer creates the outcomes and the success that we used to. The doer no longer can relax. The doer becomes addicted to the doing, because there's an association there of like doing, creating safety. If I keep doing, if I keep creating money, I'm going to feel safe. And what you find at some point in your life is that you might have all the money that the doer created. You might have the house, you might have all the material, you might have the marriage, the children, you might have the boat, the airplane, everything you want. And yet you don't feel safe. So there's a point, and it's happening a lot right now. The system's collapsing. There is a point, and I'm seeing a lot of exhaustion, that doer in you becomes absolutely exhausted. That is the egoic doer in us. I'm not saying there's not a part of us that can be the doer that is in alignment with their heart. We'll speak about that. But this sense that you always need to be doing in order to feel enough. You need to be doing in order to feel worthy. That's what I'm talking about. So there's a collapse, there's a death of this doer in all of us. And I need to create a whole video just about the doer. But this doer that cannot let go, that cannot relax because is afraid is going to live in poverty, or is afraid that it's going to lose a partner, is afraid that it's going to be criticized or judged by others, is always afraid of what other people are going to think. That is the ego. Okay? The ego is also this finite aspect of us that it's the small self, thinks everything, it always needs more. Let's put it that way. It's limited, it's small because he always believes he needs more. Let me give an example. How many times you had a goal? Let's say you had a goal to make $100,000 a year. And you hit that goal and you enjoy that goal for about 5 minutes. And you instantly go to that place, I need to make 150. You got to 150. No, I need to make 300. So it's never enough. It's insatiable. It needs more because, again, it never feels safe, and it lives with this illusion that safety comes from your outside world. It has the illusion that you're going to feel safe if you have more money. It's going to feel safe if you have a partner. It's going to feel safe if your partner marries you. It's going to feel safe if you have a bigger house. So pay attention to these patterns. And I'm not here saying that any of those things are wrong. It's just, again, it's about noticing the energy underneath and how identified you are with the money, with the marriage, with the partner, with the bigger house. Because if you identify with those things, you're going to live in a constant state of anxiety, because those things can go anytime. I use the word delusion. That the illusion, we live with the veils of illusion when the ego. Another way to describe the illusion is it's fiction. When you start ruminating in the future, because the ego operates in the past, but also the future. The ego regrets, has a lot of remorse, and a lot of guilt. Guilt is the most common expression of the ego too. When it's about the past, lives with a lot of guilt. And the ego is also in the future when it's afraid of what might happen in the future. So you see, it's guilt, it's fear, but it's always under fear. Because guilt creates a lot of, I would say, negative behaviors, a lot of people pleasing, a lot of overgiving, overdoing to compensate the guilt. So it's not truth, it's not the essence. That's an aspect of the ego. In other words, it's a splitted mind. If you call yourself saying things like, God, I feel like I have two personalities, there's two of me, we might be saying there's my head, there's my heart, or there is this part of me that is so calm, and there's this part of me that's freaked out. It's a split mind. And in this work of healing transformation, we are looking into unifying and become one mind with the heart. You might say one mind with God if you use the word God in your work. One mind with the universe. One mind with love. One mind with unity. So we want to eliminate this gap and eliminate this split mind and live in unity. Let me talk now about the patterns of the ego. I already spoke a little bit about this, but let me summarize here. The patterns will help you to do some journaling, which I hope you do after this video, by identifying certain patterns or behaviors in your life. Patterns are just, think of patterns, the conditioning that we have and how it plays in our brain. We have these pathways or automatic behaviors, they're patterns. So when you do the work, the inner work, you doing some personal growth, spiritual development, you are identifying your patterns, and then you learn maybe you learn some neuro-linguistic programming or how to interrupt a pattern. I wrote a book called What Will Love Say? If you just say that, what will love say at this moment with my partner? What will love say? That's a pattern interrupter. So it's very helpful for you to understand your patterns. So now you already know that some of the patterns of the ego, or the biggest pattern of the ego is personality and identification. How does that show up in your life? You might say things like, well, this is who I am, or I can't change that. That's who I am, and that's how I created my success. That's just me. Or I'm just like my father, I'm just like my mother. This is in the family, it's in my genes, I can't change. This is what I believe. Nobody's going to change my mind about that. We see that a lot in politics, right? So any strong positioning, when you become identified with a belief, I am a Democratic, I am a Republican, and the more separation, the more rigidity you have that, the bigger is the ego. Strong identifications are the main patterns of the ego. So what helps us to start breaking this pattern of identification is by asking big questions. A simple question would be, who am I without that belief? Who am I if I'm not a coach? Who am I if I'm not an athlete? Who am I if I don't work out so hard? Who am I? And this is usually the big questions we start asking in our 40s or 50s when we get tired, the doer in us get tired. So see what you so identify with that you hold, anything that you defend. That's another big aspect of the ego that I forgot to mention. It's separation. Anytime you defend or you attack, it's the ego. So anything that you defend very strongly, just know you are defending the ego and you making that illusion even bigger. So beliefs, rigidity are big aspects of the ego. Good way to break that pattern is by adopting an open mind. Can you adopt a beginner's mind? That's a Zen philosophy. Have an open mind. Because if you don't open your mind, you will be living the constructs of the ego, and that's extremely limiting because you're not learning, you're not growing. So when you adopt a growth mindset, when you embark on this journey of personal growth, it's not like It's almost wrong. It's not like we are growing, because we already have the truth in us. There's nothing to grow. What we're really doing is we are deconstructing the ego. That's what the path is really about. It's not about acquiring anything new. It's not about growth. It's about this deconstructing the ego. It's about disidentifying. It's about detaching so we become free. And this is a lot of material. That's why this video is going to be split in few parts. So anytime you defend, attack, also living in a state of protection. Living in a state of protection is a big one that I work with my clients. Protection. A lot of people are afraid of getting hurt, for example. So they protect their hearts. How many times, or at least once in your lifetime, have you said, I'm not going to open my heart, or I'm not going to be vulnerable because I got so hurt? I've been there. I was there. So when we live in a state of protection, it's living in a state of the limited self. And this involves a lot of inner child healing, a lot of letting go of limiting beliefs, and trust that as an adult, as a wise adult, you can handle getting hurt. It's just our fragile ego that can handle. That's another quality of the ego. The ego is very fragile. It gets offended very easily. And a lot of times, it's also addressing the inner child. So I have to make another video to help you to distinguish what is the voice of the child, what is the voice of the higher self, and what is the voice of the ego. But just know, when it's mean, it's a critic, it's judgmental, it separates, it's always the ego. The ego has this need to always be right. How many times you enter a conversation, you just want to be right? And how many of you probably have already said this? I'd rather be happy than right. I'd rather be happy than right. Let people, if I'm sitting in a circle and people are defending their beliefs, I know where they are. And I have a choice. If I'm present, I have the power of choice at that moment to say, wow, they're very identified with this belief, so I'm just going to listen. Or I'm just going to be curious and ask a question in the place of my free will, where I'm fully present. In your essence, you're always gentle. You using curiosity instead of judgment. You don't get offended by other people's choices, which is kind of rare these days to find. But, hopefully you're doing this work and you're attracting people who are in the same resonance that you are. And to summarize here, again, very important. If you are caught in the past or you are in the future, you're not in the present moment. So another way to say this, as great Eckhart Tolle described, in the present moment, there's no fear, there's no stress, because in the present moment, the ego cannot coexist. I'm going to read a quote by Eckhart Tolle from one of my favorite books, a book that I recommend everyone to read at least twice. Eckhart Tolle says this is related to the doer in us. Doing is never enough if you neglect being. So being is the state of the essence, being is the truth when you are in the present moment. Doing is never enough if you neglect being. The ego knows nothing of being, but believes you will eventually be saved by doing. If you are in the grip of the ego, you believe that by doing more, you eventually accumulate enough doings to make yourself feel complete at some point in the future. You won't. You will lose yourself in doing. So this is a great quote that describes the insatiable doer, that is never enough, because the doer is looking for safety. The doer is looking for completion. The doer is looking for peace. So the drive underneath that we all have is always the same. I have coached hundreds of clients, and everyone wants the same thing: peace, freedom, joy, abundance, love. And none of those qualities, because they're qualities of the heart, can be attained by acquiring more, by doing more. I had a big question years ago when I started my business. That was the difference between doing and being. How would I know when it was time to do versus when it was time to be. And what I have learned about that distinction is that I can be in a state of being, even though, for example, now I am doing this video. When I slow myself down, I can access my state of being. And in that state of being, I slow myself down. I become even more present with this action of doing. So I have learned that I can always be in a state of being. But to be in the state of being while I'm doing, I had to train myself through thousands of hours of meditations, and I still do every single day, to strengthen this state of just being. Because when you just practice being, you are strengthening, you are creating deeper connections with the higher self, with the witness in you that can observe that voice in your head that is the ego. But when you entangle with the ego, you don't know the difference. And that's a big intention behind this work that I'm doing. So this is part 1. I hope that by now, and you might have to watch this video again, I hope by now you know what the ego is, why it's important to transform the ego, to heal, to purify the ego, what the patterns are, how is this showing up in your life through your words, through your thoughts, through your behaviors, actions. How is that showing up? Journal. Get intimate with your ego, because again, the only way to dissolve our illusions is by looking at them. Just like A Course in Miracles is stated. Look at your ego, be gentle, don't judge, don't be harsh. Harshness doesn't serve you, doesn't serve your work of healing. And if you're ready, if this made clarity, slide straight to part 2 of this video, where I'm going to be speaking more about the process of healing, purifying the ego. How do you start living more in your essence? Thank you so much, and many blessings in your day.